All right, so the goal is to get us to the end of the play today and to maybe show you a few more scenes. Thanks to my friend Shauna Graham, who asked me a question after last time about Don Pedro. I went off on a tangent about Don Pedro and my own thoughts, and I hope it will be productive. Um, Basically what I was saying the last time was that the play is offering us some kind of analysis, if you want to go that far, of masculinity on the one hand, military masculinity in particular, and wit on the other, as broadly defined as a use of language or intelligence that can draw people together or pull them apart and set them in conflict. And although our attention keeps moving back toward Beatrice and Benedict in the play, I myself, I think some of you indicated this as well last time, we're just eager for them to be on stage, sparring with each other. There really is virtually no moment in the play where Shakespeare is thinking about masculinity and is thinking about wit don't converge on Don Pedro. I have to keep reminding myself that he is not a minor character, which is really weird. He doesn't have as many lines as Benedict, and he has no soliloquies at all, but he is the highest ranking character in the play's world. He is the prince of Aragon, and everybody else in the play owes him obedience. And he is the strategist or the impresario who keeps moving the plot forward, at least through Act 4, Scene 1, when he and Claudio shame Hero at her wedding. And you can think of him in that sense as sort of general of the theater, right? He is a forerunner of Duke Vincentio in Measure for Measure, who is always running around and staging little scenes for people to perform in, even though they don't know a play is afoot. Or even Prospero in The Tempest. Prospero is also a duke who spends a lot of time organizing mini dramas that other characters have to play out in order to become something other than what they are. Okay, so I just wanted, before we get into the second half of the play today, I want to remind us how central Don Pedro and his witty activity, his practices, if you remember that word from last time, how central they are to Shakespeare's overall design. I'll just walk you through a list of things he does. In 1-1, you know that Don Pedro has the brilliant idea to disguise himself as Claudio and win Hero for his friend. Now, this raises a really interesting question, which maybe we can talk about today. How old do you think Don Pedro should be in order to be able to pull off that disguise? I have never seen a production of the play, including the one on DVD, where Don Pedro isn't my age or older, right? But remember, he is unmarried. He has no children. And he's very laddish in the way he interacts with people in the play. You know, his bold idea to disguise himself as Claudio may be an indication that they are closer in age than modern productions lead us to believe, that he can actually pass himself off to Hero as Claudio. Okay, so then in Act 2, Scene 1, during that masked ball, Claudio, Benedict, and Don John all misinterpret Don Pedro's performance as Claudio and believe that he has betrayed Claudio. Right? His performance as a young man in love is so compelling that they think that he's actually changed the terms of the practice. He, however, believes that his scheme has been a total success, despite the fact that Claudio has a mini meltdown and almost becomes insubordinate. And he's so buoyed by the fact that Claudio and Hero have gotten engaged, thanks to his brilliant practice, that he asks Beatrice if she will marry him, right? Another indication that he may be closer in age to Benedict, Beatrice, Claudio, and Hero than this production leads us to believe. After she refuses that proposal, if it is a proposal, he lands on the idea that Beatrice and Benedict should marry each other, and he resolves to practice on Benedict, that word practice appears in that speech, in order to fashion a match between them. Fashion is another really important word in the play. It occurs 19 times. It comes from the Latin verb meaning to make. make something. And I think it's another, when you see it, and we should see it a lot today, when the watch arrests Baraccio and Conrad, occurs 10 times in that scene. It's another opportunity to think about the implications of making things up with your wit or pretending to be someone that you're not. Okay, so what motivates Don Pedro to make this match between Beatrice and Benedict? It sort of runs the gamut, as one of you said last time, between pure philanthropy, he just wants what's best for them, to revenge, right? Because he's upset that she rejected him. By the end of that scene, it is clear that Don Pedro has started to think of himself as a love god. He says, "We are the only love gods," meaning himself, because he has arranged this match between Hero and Claudio. And now he's going to do it again with Beatrice and Benedict, having failed to do it for himself, right? So feeling like a love god is preferable to feeling like a rejected suitor, right? Rejected in particular by a woman who is inferior to him socially and who should have recognized him as a catch, as smart as Benedict, and much more lofty in the social order than herself. And also feeling like a love god and doing something to Benedict is also, I guess, preferable to feeling like a prince whose followers refuse to do what he wants. And remember, he really wants Benedict to fall in love and get married. He calls him an obstinate heretic in despite of beauty. His wit turns to the project of making him feel maybe more potent or authoritative than the events of the play are bearing out. As we saw last time in Act 2, Scene 3, Don Pedro, Claudio, and Leonardo practice on Benedict, and Don Pedro leads that scene, relishing the prospect of doing to Beatrice what he just did to Benedict, but he's going to do it through Hero and Ursula. He's looking forward to the time when they think they are in love with each other and are speechless, because they won't be, if they think they're in love with each other, they won't be bantering anymore. They won't be sparring. He looks forward to that as a dumb show, he says. So he's enjoying the thought of turning them into a spectacle to enjoy, but a spectacle in which their wit falls silent. Right? That's very noteworthy, I think. I'm not suggesting that he's like the devil. There's a certain lack of self-awareness that is related to his incredible ingenuity as an impresario at the same time. Okay, in Act 3, Scene 1, Hero and Ursula practice on Beatrice using Don Pedro's instructions. In Act 3, Scene 2, Don Pedro and Claudio get a chance to enjoy the change that has come over Benedict since he has fallen in love with Beatrice. Basically, they're relishing the fact that he is becoming inconstant to his promise never to be in love and never to marry. That's a little bit nasty, but it's lads making fun of each other. And then when Benedict leaves the scene, Don John shows up and immediately practices on Don Pedro and Claudio by telling them that Hero is unchaste, basically that she's inconstant. And they promise that they will shame and disgrace her if Don John can prove what he says. Now, what should happen now, we'll come back to this in a minute, what should happen now is that we should see the scene in which Don, John, and Baraccio and Margaret put on a show for Don Pedro and Claudio and trick them, or gull them. Presumably that is what happens off stage. Don John puts this show on for them. He leads them to believe that they know something when in fact they are ignorant about what is actually happening. They must believe that they're witnessing Hero disgrace herself, but really it's they who are disgracing themselves by trusting Don John and being there, eavesdropping. Right? But we don't see that, and I'll come back to that in a minute. So the play rolls on to Act 3, Scene 3, which I'll show you in a minute. After that, in Act 4, Scene 1, Don Pedro and Claudio follow through on their promise to shame and disgrace Hero. And they do that by pretending that they've turned up for a wedding, when in fact they're there for a public humiliation. Now, that example of play acting, pretending that you're there as a groom, but actually showing up to be a humiliator, that seems to me to have a lot in common with Don Pedro's earlier schemes, right? There's no suggestion that Don John gave them that idea. All Don John wants to do is to make Claudio not want to marry Hero, right? He wants to kill the marriage, not necessarily disgrace her. So the reason I think that what happens in 4-1 has something to do, maybe the latest practice of Don Pedro's is that he is an expert practitioner when it comes to catching people off their guard and surprising them with what they don't know and making fools of them, right? Sometimes he's making a fool of them, arguably, from a philanthropic impulse. He wants Benedict and Beatrice to get over their aversion to marriage and accept that they are soulmates for each other. But it's also equally possible, it's always equally possible in his schemes that he's doing something to other people for his own satisfaction or enjoyment. And you'll note that the plot that Don John and Borachio launch against Claudio and Hero is basically an imitation of all of the things that Don Pedro has done earlier. Right? They put on a play for him and make him think that he knows what's happening. So Don John may be responsible for deceiving Don Pedro and Claudio, but it's really this, I think, the surprise that Don Pedro and Claudio play on Hero and Leonato that undermines the social order in the play and its consensus about what it means to be an honorable person. You'll have noticed reading this week that Leonato is immediately torn between believing his prince and believing his daughter. Eventually, he sides with his daughter. Leonato and Antonio struggle to remain obedient to Don Pedro and deferent to Claudio, who outranks them in the feudal order, but also to defend the honor of their family. And Benedict must choose between being loyal to Beatrice or being loyal to his master and his friend. In a well-regulated Shakespearean society, those different duties, those different obligations are not in conflict, right? Shakespeare's idea of a harmonious society is that all of the different parts we play, father, in my case, father, husband, friend, teacher, etc., neighbor, etc., they all work together toward harmony. But that once Don Pedro and Claudio accuse Hero unjustly, the whole thing starts to fall apart and people are torn between one role they have to play and another, which is not good for Shakespeare. This is a kind of moral chaos that Shakespeare is really interested in all of his plays, comedies, and tragedies. Okay, so how is the play going to solve that problem? Well, the truth about Don John's plot against Don Pedro and Claudio has to come out, and it eventually comes out in the presence of the law, right? When the sexton takes the deposition of Borachio and Conrad, we learn what's really been going on. But you may have noticed that Borachio's two confessions, first to the sexton in Act 4, Scene 2, and then to Don Pedro in Act 5, Scene 1, that truth-telling is not sufficient to fix what's been broken by these exercises of masculine wit, right, that have led up to this problem. It turns out that the theater also plays a role in repairing the damage that all this play acting has done. But this time, the impresario will be the friar rather than Don Pedro or Don John. Okay, so the question I hope we eventually get to today, we must get to today, you cannot leave until we get to today, is, how does the friar as a practitioner of theater differ from Don Pedro and from Don John? He's using his wit to promote other sex love and marriage, and that makes him resemble Don Pedro, at least as far as Hero and Claudio and Benedict and Beatrice are concerned. Does the friar also enjoy catching people off guard and making a fool of them? Is there a way to make a fool of somebody that actually changes that person into someone with self-knowledge and self-awareness? Does the friar make theater with a different spirit from Don John? And what should we infer from this comparison of all of these theater makers, Don Pedro, Don John, and the friar, about the sort of spirit and purpose of Shakespearean comedy? Much more than I thought when I started preparing for this class, really think this Much Ado is Shakespeare taking a really long look and inviting us to look with him at the principles of comedy, right? Okay.
Sean?
Yeah.
And another question about the friar that I had was,
Yeah.
why a friar? Why is the friar the director?
Well, it's a great question, right? Especially in Reformation England, right? Where, generally speaking, when friars and monks show up on the English stage, they're devils, right? Or they're part of a very publicly, widely enjoyed, and deeply embraced anti-Catholicism. So I think that's a great question, and it may have something to do with the fact that he's not a military person. And as a friar, he's also outside the order of sexual desire. I know we don't believe that about friars, but there's a way in which his friary takes him outside of the whole zone of desire that all of these other characters are enmeshed in.
Yeah, I was just wondering if Shakespeare was trying to tell us that the friar is the symbol of moral rectitude.
Right.
And therefore, he will be final director of the play acting.
Right. I mean, I think that is a great question too. Do you come out of this? Do you come out of this experience with Much Ado? Will you come out in the summer with a conviction that for Shakespeare, comedy is a moral art form, and that Shakespeare is some kind of moralist? There's certainly plenty of ground for thinking about that. It's also equally possible that what the friar does is just one of many attempts to make things right by using theater, and that there may be, and he has his counterpart, for example, in Romeo and Juliet, another friar, right, who tries a very similar scheme. Let's pretend you're dead, right, and everything will work out okay, and you'll be able to get married again, except that that friar, who's also very well-intentioned, loves Juliet, loves Romeo, trying to rescue them from their violent parents. His plan goes wrong, right? And they both end up dead. So I think in a way, this play invites us to think about that friar as well, since it involves an illusionary death of a girl. Yeah. Okay. So let's remember to talk about that. Okay, but before we do all this and we think about what Shakespeare might be talking about, telling us about his art form and how he wants us to think about our presence in the theater while that art form is occurring. If the play is full of scenes in which someone thinks he knows what's going on because he's eavesdropping, and it turns out he doesn't know what's going on, that the person who's watching and eavesdropping is actually the one that's being made a fool of, not the one who is fooling. That really puts us in a tender spot. Where do we sit in the theater? Okay, but before we get to all of that, that's where we will get today. I just wanted to go back to the fact that we don't see the gulling of Don John and Claudio. We don't see Margaret pretend to be Hero. We don't see Borachio apparently have some kind of sex act with her. I mean, they see we don't know exactly what they see, but it's enough to persuade Don Pedro and Claudio that Hero is in fact disloyal. That's Don John's word. Okay, so in a moment, I'm going to show you the scene that is actually where that scene should be. It's Dogberry's arrival on the stage, and we'll talk about that. But why do you think Shakespeare won't allow us to see that third deception? It's perfect, right? First, we've seen Benedict be deceived. Then we've seen Beatrice deceived. Now we should be ready for the third time, which is to see Don Pedro deceived. Why aren't we allowed to see that? Did you notice that we weren't allowed to see it? Yeah. Did you? Okay. So obviously it has some impact on how we understand what Claudio and Don Pedro do to Hero later. Does not seeing this trick that's being played set you up in a certain way to experience Act 4, Scene 1 when they do this terrible thing. Yes.
Well, you don't really know how graphic what they see is, how shocking it is. So it's like we can imagine all kinds of things.
Okay, so all right, that's a really interesting point. Do you so you're suggesting that in fact the omission of this scene invites us to be really salacious in imagining what they did together. In this, we won't see it, but in this production, the Baraccio, when he relates, how well it went, he is quite graphic about what Margaret did to him at that window. They actually have a full-on sexual encounter. Okay, so it's really an interesting idea that by not showing us that, the audience's imagination is enlisted in imagining that. It's a trick. So you're sitting in a position of sort of safety. You're not really going to be taken in by Don John in this moment because it's not Hero. It's Margaret, right? But nevertheless, you're being invited to imagine something really graphically sexual. And in that sense, you're doing Don John's work there in the privacy of the theater. Like Don Pedro and Claudio, you are imagining something that really isn't there, right? So is that the point of not showing us the... say.
Well, it could be the opposite. Not seeing it are harder on Don Pedro and Claudio.
Because it's a trick.
It's a trick. Could they fall for it? You don't see it, so you can also imagine that they were more readily fooled than you would.
Okay, let's take up that part of your comment because it's really great. Why would Don Pedro and Claudio be predisposed to believe that this could possibly be true? We've just had almost three acts of hearing how great Hero is as a girl. Unlike Beatrice, she has no, as I said last time, she has no shrewish qualities. She is the very embodiment of what Reformation patriarchy wanted from unmarried women: chaste, silent, and obedient. Right? She is prepared to marry Don Pedro because you remember initially Leonardo thinks that Don Pedro is going to propose marriage to her directly because his servant has misheard what Don Pedro said to Claudio. Okay, she's prepared to say yes to Don Pedro, right? Even though she loves Claudio. Okay, so
I was just saying, could it be that they are, as military men, they're quick to rush
to judgment, decisive action?
Because that's what they have to do on the field.
And
when it comes to society, they have to make quick judgments.
Yeah.
Like
Please.
No matter she looks, women are not trusted, and they're really at core full of deceit and deception.
What do you? Yeah.
Can Margaret come back later, and she was in the play being seduced or something? She would not be a credible character later on when she says, "I didn't know what I was doing."
Yeah, later in the play, Leonardo will say, let's take this man, Baraccio, and go take this naughty man and go talk to Margaret because she obviously has some complicity in this. And then even later in the play, I think it's the last scene, we learn that yes, she was unchaste with Baraccio, but she didn't know she was pretending to be Hero. I mean, she's sort of duped on the other side. I mean, there is a way in which through Margaret, to take this point up, through the way that Margaret is manipulated sexually by her boyfriend, Baraccio, but is unaware that she's being manipulated. Arguably she's enjoying that sexual encounter at the window. She thinks Baraccio has slipped away from Don John, and they're having an assignation the night before Hero's wedding, right? Boyfriend and girlfriend. Later, she discovers that he has used her as part of this plot. So again, that Margaret is a way for, I think, that we can reflect back on our situation in the audience. We have been persuaded that we're watching something under the cover of darkness that we enjoy. But what if it turns out that we're being used in some way, right? Is the theater, is the play using us to achieve some outcome? And let's not forget, the theater is not, it's a commercial art form in Shakespeare's period. They're not giving it away for free. You're paying to be there. You're paying to have strong emotional responses to illusions, including anger, sorrow, arousal, laughter, right? Laughter and tears and everything in between. And this is why it's not uncommon for Shakespeare himself and for writers about the theater in his period to compare theaters to brothels. You are paying to have vicarious, emotional, psychological experiences in the theater. So in a way, we are in Margaret's position. We are arguably in Margaret's position. Have we been a party to something, thinking that it's for our enjoyment, when in fact we've been complicit in something really misogynistic and anti-feminist, right? I mean, do we enjoy some aspect of Hero's humiliation? Right. Okay. Okay, so last time I said that there were 17 versions of the Hero in Claudio's story in print or on the stage during the time this play was made. So Shakespeare is riding a wave. What is what is so popular, do you think, about the story of a chaste woman unjustly accused? Right? I mean, it's not easy to conclude that that story is simply misogynistic because it is about an injustice, right? No one is meant to leave those novellas, if that's what they are, or to leave those other plays, or I think to leave this play, thinking that Hero was treated fairly. So is it a feminist narrative, or is it an anti-feminist narrative?
What is here?
Right. Great question. The only answer I can give you is that there's a famous poem called Hero and Leander. Have you ever heard of that? So the Renaissance believed that that was the first poem that was ever composed. In fact, it was composed in the 5th century, probably by a school teacher on the fringe of what used to be the Roman Empire. But they believe that it's the very first story. And I think one of the reasons why in the English Renaissance is they begin trying to fashion a literary tradition of their own, looking back to ancient models. There are so many versions of teen love gone wrong. In Hero and Leander, 2 kids separated by the Hellespont, what's now Turkey. Leander, swims over to have sex with her in her tower. They do that a few times. One night he drowns along the way, and she throws herself out the window. So it's a kind of her version of the story of Romeo and Juliet, although Ovid's story of Pyramus and Thisbe is a closer version, right? So Hero, it might be for Shakespeare some remnant of that myth. It also might be telling us that she is the hero of this play on some level, right? That she is the one who's up against the worst odds and whom the play is going to show going through an ordeal that will bring her out the other end of it. I mean, the question of whether you think in respect to her, the play is ultimately feminist or anti-feminist, to put it crudely, may come down to how you feel about the fact that she forgives Claudio. That's either an extraordinary imaginative and moral achievement on her part, or it's a kind of anti-feminist imagining of what women can put up with and should put up with. Because he's sorry now. So she should love him again, right? It's axiomatic, right? And I think a lot, that how you feel about that ultimately depends on what you see in a particular performance. But I do think for a character who speaks very little in the play, she has a huge importance to the way the play thinks about what comedy is able to achieve in terms of changing behavior, bringing people together after devastating breaches of trust. Yeah. So, but I've talked all over you. Do any of you think that Hero is the hero of the play and that this is actually a story about the resilience of women in the face of adolescent patriarchal men? Yeah.
Can you, if you can repeat the
Yeah,
question?
sure.
She just seems like she's being herself, being obedient and doing whatever she's told to do, because the bigger thing, in my opinion, that she has to forgive Claudio for and does, is that even after she's been proven innocent, unjustly accused, he's like, oh, the next day he's going to marry somebody else just fine.
Yeah, her cousin, who happens to be her twin. Yeah.
So it's the same as when she was told to marry Don Pedro. It's like, I'm a girl, I just have to do what you tell me to. So not really heroic, but obedient.
Yeah, so for those of you at home, Sue was just in the audience here in the room, was saying that there's a way in which Hero never really changes across the play. She's obedient before the disaster that Don John creates, and she's obedient after the disaster that her father hasn't, it's her father who proposes the new marriage, and she just goes along with it. It is really an interesting question whether she's a relatively empty vessel in the play and just a sort of pawn that men move around a chessboard as they try to secure alliances with each other, in contrast to Beatrice, who has such a rich linguistic texture and obviously an internal life, right? She has an internal life. Or whether Hero is actually, despite her relative silence, full psychologically, that she is reconciled to the world she lives in and actually feels what she says. We'll look at that before the end of today. Go ahead. Mr. Constancy. Yep. Yeah. He refuses to change. It's antonyms, right? Yes, and I am interested in the very last line of the play. We shouldn't be here yet, but let's go there. So the last speaker in the play is Benedict, right? Here it is. And the word has just come that John has been captured because he fled, right? Like a baby. He says, think not of him till tomorrow. I'll devise the brave punishments for him. Strike up, pipers. So I think that word punishments is different. We're supposed to feel the difference between punishment and practice. Benedict is not going to put on a little play that will trick Don John into becoming a better person, the way the other people have sort of gone through a kind of moral process through theatricality. Don John, on some level, is beyond the comic ecology of the play, right? Because of what he's done. And Benedict is going to punish him back into, well, maybe just punish him, not change him into anything. So the play does seem to have a sense that if you're the kind of person who cannot change, you may have put yourself beyond the generous ordeals that are required. You've been put beyond mockery into some other category. And he's a melancholiac as well. He refuses not to be sad there from his very first appearance in the play, right? In Act 1, Scene 2, Act 1, Scene 3, he says to his followers, don't try to alter me. I am sad, and that's who I am. Okay, so there's another fate in store for him in the way that there's another fate in store for Shylock. There's another fate in store, maybe even for Jaques and As You Like It. People who won't make the effort to reintegrate don't get included. And the other thing that's noteworthy here, which we will come to, is why Benedict is the last speaker and why he's in the position of the dispenser of justice. That should be Don Pedro. right? What has happened to Don Pedro after the wedding? He's called Prince in this version of the text. In other versions, he's called Don Pedro. He says, the former hero that is dead. So he's moved into the condition of wonder. He doesn't say anything. The last thing he says in the play is, how dost thou benedict the married man? It's very odd that there's this kind of transfer of focus and authority to Benedict as the married man at the end of the play. Okay, so with Benedict or
Can you repeat what was that?
yeah, sure. The question is Benedict the man, or maybe the character in general, who changes the most over the course of the play? I think my instinct is to say yes, that he, unlike the other men in the play, he is the one who successfully figures out how to have relationships with women, how to be loyal to women, how to prefer doing justice to women over obedience to men. And he succeeds in having a relationship with Beatrice that doesn't put her through the ordeal that Hero goes through. So he is in some sort of morally, it's not superior in the sense that he's a godlike sage, but he does have moral assets, psychological assets at the end of the play that the others do not appear to have. He doesn't have he doesn't have to really apologize for anything. And he winds up with a soulmate rather than a woman about whom sort of Sue's question hangs over. Does she really want to be with him, or is she doing this because her father told her to? The fact that Beatrice has no father in the play. Yeah, and they have to read each other's bad poetry. Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. Okay, so we're doing well. Can I take you back to Act 3, Scene 3, which is where the gulling of Don John should be. This is the moment where I'll show it you just here in case you're following along in your book, but I'm going to play it for you if the technology will cooperate. Where the gulling of Don Pedro should be is Dogberry and the watch. It's been very fruitful for me over the years working with students to suggest to them that Shakespeare's plays are sort of like living organisms that have great complexity at the cellular level. Something has happened in 3-2 when Don John gets the upper hand on Don Pedro and Claudio that seems to call forth, I don't know, like an autoimmune response from the play. This is the midpoint of the play, too. Dogberry arrives, right? The police are called out, right? So that's one way of beginning to think about why Dogberry is here and not elsewhere. And this is also the moment in the play where, after all of this highly rational, witty, intelligent activity that we've been watching for almost 3 acts, the play turns to folly and foolishness. Like Dogberry is the play's clown. And while you're watching what I'm going to show you, you might just cast your mind back to other Shakespeare plays where there are fools and what their function really, really is. Okay, so just give me a second. So I defeat copyright law and look at myself. Okay, now
Not watching,
it's okay.
studying the text, sorry.
Don't look behind the curtain. People at home, can you hear that music?
No.
You tell me, Doug. While I find the chat.
No.
You cannot hear it.
Well,
I'll try turning it up when we get there. Oh, sorry, my bad.
I share the screen too, right?
Yep. if any of you are tech billionaires, if you could invent a better way to find the exact moment in a DVD that you want to show, apart from this really crude, like sliding ruler, that would be great. Okay, so I'm going to show you Act 3, Scene 3, which you can't see at all. And this, in this production, is right after intermission. So the play literally, that production and many productions mark the gap, the scene that's missing by going to intermission. It's not sharing. You can't see it. Let's try again. Let's just go the whole desktop. You can see it now?
The whole desktop, yes.
Get rid of the floating control.
We can see it, not hear it.
You can see it, but not hear it.
Yes.
Can you hear it? Mute my microphone.
Well, just leave it on. Do the best.
So, well, it's been too good for them. They shall have any allegiance in them, being chosen for the principal. Well, give them their child name and upgrade first. You, the most disastrous man because your king, sir. I'm John Seacolt, will make the right and read. Come in, Mr. Seacolt. God bless you. To you, I want to read by nature. Sir, I read God nights and make no boast of it. And for the writing and reading, and not appear when there be no need for such vanity. You are brought here to be the most senseless and fit man for the post of the watch. Therefore, bear you the mantle. Bear you the mantle. Good job. Don't stand in the prince's name. Oh, he will not stand. I then take a note of it, but let him go. And presently, all the rest of the watch together, and my God, you are real men. You all stand with it. It's not of the prince's subject. True, and they are to meddle with none of the prince's subjects. Speak of the ancient and most far watchman, but not see how sleeping should have been. Only have a care, your bills be not stolen. Well, you have not to go and houses, the those that are drunk today. Oh, we will not fight. They may be sober. not getting the answer. They say that I'm not the man you took me for. Well, sir, you need to think. You may suspect him, by virtue of your office, to be no true man. For such kind of men, you may well make with them by the lowest of honesty. We don't live out. You may, but he may such speech will be defiant. Most peaceable way to you. Secondly, let him show himself what he is and steal out of your company. You are a child crying in the night, call to the nurse and beg her, state! Oh, the nurse, please. Protect the prince's own person. You meet the prince in the night, you may stay. Very violate that I think you cannot. 5 shillings to 1 on it. Anybody knows the statutes, he may stay him, marry if the prince be willing. For the watch should offend no man, and it is an offence to stay a man against his will. Well, you don't think me so. Masters, good night. Is there any matter of great chances? Call me. Give you fellas counsel and go. And so good night. Come later. Well, master, we hear our charge. The concept here on the chat page don't do. They don't go to bed. These neighbours, I pray you, Shabbat, see you Leonato's. There being the wedding later. There being the wedding later. There being the wedding later. There being the wedding tomorrow. Miss Great Cornwall tonight. Monsieur, be vigilant. I beseech you.
Okay. So, and then what follows there? Wait, you don't want to see the play. Yeah, here we go. There we go. What follows there is Baraccio and Conrad revealing themselves to the night watch. Okay. So just a few thoughts about what you were seeing there. So that actor is I think he's pretty good Dogberry, actually. And that weird Tourette's-like flinch and noise that he has every time is signaling that he is about to have a malapropism, right? He's about to misuse a word. Okay. So normally for Shakespeare, minor characters tell us something very important about major characters. They're sort of like diagnoses of what's happening to one or more major characters as they go through their changes, right? Generally true in Shakespeare's comedies that while major characters have the opportunity or the obligation to change in different ways, minor characters are always themselves. They will never be different. And the sort of dynamism of Shakespearean comedy sort of chafes against these two things. Actually, it's not just the comedy. Those of you who know Henry IV Part 1 and Hal and Falstaff, Hal must change significantly as he makes his path from the son of a thief and a murderer to the best king that England ever had. Falstaff is always the same and is a kind of measurement for Hal's development or lack of development at different moments. And when Hal develops beyond him, he has to be discarded. Okay, so what is Dogberry telling us about the major characters in this play, and specifically about Don Pedro, right? They are parallel to each other in the sense that they are both figures of the law, of law enforcement, in fact. And we should be with Don Pedro right now, but we're with Dogberry, right? So what do we learn about the play's attitude toward Don Pedro through this scene with Dogberry? Anything in the right?
Sure.
Yeah.
Morning, we take a quick,
Oh, no, we can take a break. Right, let's take 5 minutes.
yeah, 5 minutes.
5 minutes, we'll come back and
5
we'll
minutes.
take up Dogberry.
Then we answer them.
Another place, or Zoom, or another day. Another day.
Another day. So we need to pick a date so that we can, have the room available. It all depends on the mom.
I can't speak for her. I can't speak for her schedule, but if it's another day, I'm sure another day could be found. But you see, but what you're saying clearly is you don't want her to do that lecture on Zoom for everybody.
Well, still, I don't think. A lot of people are gonna go. It's just demographic.
What better No King's Rally could you participate in than a
Right.
discussion of Macbeth?
So, so yeah, I think what you mean by Zoom is not Zoom on that Saturday, but on a different date. That's, so.
So you,
It might be easier.
your preference is to do it on a different date in person, but you're willing to accept a different date on Zoom. Right, you have your answer.
We can.
April 4th. Is it possible for us to do the following Saturday?
Yeah.
She's not available.
She isn't available. She'll be away.
Not available for the next Saturday.
Yeah.
It's Sunday, it just.
It's about room availability also.
But if it were virtual.
Virtual would be no problem.
Do you want me to propose the 29th, Sunday the 29th? On Zoom.
For Zoom. Everybody okay with Sunday?
She was very good. We should have.
Yeah.
Not Sunday, because that's.
Okay, so we will look for a date sometime.
Send me an email.
Yeah, send Doug an email.
I'll send the poll.
But I think we understand your preference. Okay, and then Sue has an announcement about Santa Cruz Shakespeare.
Well, to go back to where we
Sue,
started about the cost.
Can you get closer to the microphone?
This is nice if you stand here.
About the cost of housing. I work to find housing for people coming into Santa Cruz Shakespeare to create our season. And right now I have a group of interns who.
So we're thinking about Dogberry. I suggested that he's a response to some crisis that has emerged in the play, but the play can't represent directly. Okay, so I'll speed us along there by saying, maybe the play wants us to understand that Don Pedro has made a fool of himself, right? That he is a fool, and that he's falling down on the job of being the sovereign character in the play, right? Dogberry's characteristics in, what makes him foolish? He's too lenient. What do we do if someone we tell to go home won't go home? Well, walk away, right? What if someone's drunk? What do we do? Well, if they won't obey you, let them be drunk, right? So he's too lenient. And in the subsequent scene, which we won't look at because we don't have time, it's during the interrogation of Baracho and Conrad. They say, we're not villains. And Dogberry turns to the sexton and Don Pedro and says, well, they say they're none, so guess we gotta let them go, right? So it's like part of what the play seems to be targeting in Don Pedro through Dogberry is Don Pedro's lenience toward Don John, his lack of skepticism about Don John, his trusting. Why does he trust Don John? We don't really see them interact. We never see a conversation between them. But I think there's a kind of, going back to the problem of masculinity in this play, there is a basic predisposition that you can trust men of your own rank, from your band of brothers, even if they've betrayed you, in a way that you can't trust women. So one other thing. And then the other thing that's characteristic of Dogberry is his malapropisms, right? The fact that he doesn't know how to use his wit correctly. A fourth thing that matters about him is that he's really angry when Conrad calls him an ass. And he keeps humiliating himself by saying, can you believe that they told me I'm an ass? I'm an ass. Did you hear that? I'm an ass. Right? So it would take some work really to put this all together as a kind of subversive portrait of Don Pedro. But I do think there's a way in which Dogberry reflects back to the rest of the play that Don Pedro is not sufficiently skeptical of his brother or of what he sees and hears. He's taken in by that performance that we don't see. He is not really in control of his linguistic faculty, this wit that he uses to sort of put these little playlets together for other people, and that he may be excessively concerned with his own cleverness. And when, so Dogberry's anger about being called an ass is sort of like the other side of that coin. Look how clever I am at my practices. Can you believe they called me an ass? Right? Okay, so that Dogberry's presence in the play suggests that something has to happen with Don Pedro, to make him viable as a figure that everyone else can obey, right? As a figure who can have authority in the play. He has sort of given up his legitimacy on some level by being taken in by his brother, and then doing one better than his brother by doing what he does to Hero with Claudio's help. Okay, so with that in mind, let me just in the time we have left, I want to fast forward to Act 4, Scene 1 to look at the friar and to think about the way in which the friar exhibits different qualities of mind from Don Pedro and other men in the play. Going back to your question, Doug, about why is the friar exceptional? Okay, so I think I'll put this on single page so it's easier to see. There you go. Yeah, okay. Okay, so Hero has passed out. Claudio, Don Pedro, and his brother have left. You can see that in the stage direction there. And Benedict has begun to cross over into the group of women, right, as their ally. How doth the lady? He hasn't said a word while this humiliation has been taking place, but now he sort of shows his colors by coming to Beatrice's aid. Leonardo, and the friar says, have comfort, lady. Leonardo, who's very angry at Hero at this moment, sadly, expresses anger that she's even stirring. He would prefer for her to be dead now. And Friar is now going to engage in a kind of argument with Leonardo about Hero's moral status, about her culpability or innocence. Yea, wherefore should she not? Why shouldn't she stir? Right? So Leonardo will now go into a long speech about how disgraceful her behavior is, etc. After which Friar interrupts with "Hear me a little." So now we're in Act 4, Scene 1, around line 165. I'll read that out so we can hear it. So, hear me a little, for I have only silent been so long, and given way unto this course of fortune, by noting of the lady, noting, much ado about noting, right? I have marked 1,000 blushing apparitions to start into her face, 1,000 innocent shames in angel whiteness beat away those blushes, and in her eye there hath appeared a fire to burn the errors that these princes hold against her maiden truth. Call me a fool, trust not my reading nor my observations, which with experimental seal doth warrant the tenor of my book. Trust not my age, my reverence, calling nor divinity, if this sweet lady lie not guiltless here under some biting error. So let's just start there. What is different about the friar and the way he sees Hero from the way her father sees her, the way Claudio sees her, the way Don Pedro sees her, the way Don John sees her?
Paying attention. Seems like he's paying attention, he's noting, he's seeing her as opposed to running on this narrative that's been created, the illusion.
Okay, so I think the signal that we are meant to compare the way the friar interprets what he sees. He's also sort of a bystander to a play that's unfolding before him, right? Is that word noting, right? We've seen we've seen two, and we've heard about one other instance of noting that have had variable success in achieving their outcomes. Why isn't the friar's way of noting Hero also prone to reading the surface rather than the true meaning, right? In a way, he has focused he's focused his attention on what's happening in her face and in her eyes, which means he's not drawing on deep knowledge, personal knowledge of her. He's also interpreting the evidence that can be visible evidence rather than invisible evidence. But what makes him a better reader? I mean, we think we know that Hero is chaste. We want to believe that. But why does he know? Why can we trust him? Why can we trust his observations when Don Pedro, arguably one of the wittiest characters in the play, most intelligent characters in the play, can't be trusted? Yeah.
So it's like he is not subject to the loyalty of the masculine thing where, despite what's in the obvious evidence in front of your eyes, your masculine loyalty is to shame, to buy into that story about himself. And he's really observing her.
Yeah.
And defying that expectation.
Yeah, those are both excellent points. That he's outside the circle of military masculinity. He answers to a higher power. And unlike Don Pedro, his honor is not impugned by what's happening, what Hero might have done, right? One of the reasons why Don Pedro may be disposed to believe Don John is that Don John has succeeded in making Don Pedro anxious that if Hero is unchaste, it's on Don Pedro, right? He's the one who set this whole match up. If he's not good at matchmaking, what is he good at, right? He won a war, but he failed to do justice to the enemy, his brother. Okay. So that's one point. And then the other point is that he's actually paying, I mean, whatever else you want to say about Friar in this scene, he succeeds in paying attention to Hero, right? After she recovers a little more.
He also says, maybe I'm wrong.
Oh.
He's willing to say,
Yes.
this is what I see, maybe I'm wrong, but.
I call me a fool.
Yeah.
I'm not ashamed of being a fool, but I'm coming forward and making this case. Leonardo continues the argument by saying, no, this can't be true. Thou seest that all the grace she hath left is that she will not add to her damnation the sin of perjury. She not denies it. And at that point, Friar turns away from him and talks directly to Hero. That's another clear, I think, reorientation of the scene. He asks her, what is the man that you're accused of? She says, how could I possibly know that? Right, I haven't been with any other man. She turns back to her father, and that's good enough for Friar. He says there is some strange misprision in the princes. They've misinterpreted something very badly. That allows Benedict to come forward and sort of acknowledge that some honor is due to Don Pedro and Claudio, but the practice of it, if they have been misled, the practice of it lives in John the Bastard. I think that's the first time we learn that they are bastard, that they're half brothers, not full brothers.
Okay, that's a comment from the Zoomer.
Oh, yeah.
Julie is saying the friar sees all members of, it's all members of, as, sees everyone as equal members of humanity,
Oh.
not as a chattel, men in the play at the time, you women. So
The friar
she's all-
looks at everyone as an equal human being, not as a member of the feudal order, not as a member of the patriarchal order. Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so now the friar is going to sort of come to the forefront and come up with this great idea, kind of imitation of Romeo and Juliet, that the way to turn things around is to pretend that hero is dead.
Mhm.
And Leonardo doesn't understand how that's going to work. Friar says the following: Mary, this well carried shall on her behalf, change slander to remorse. That is some good. But not for that dream I on this strange course, but on this travail look for greater birth, something coming back to life. To draw your attention to something. I have to look at my other copy. Yeah, okay. This is an interesting speech. She dying, as it must be so maintained, upon the instant that she was accused, shall be lamented, pitied, and excused of every hearer. He has some sense of how his theatrical plan will be received, right? He has some insight into human psychology that Don Pedro, I think, lacks. Don Pedro is interested in breaking news to people and then taking advantage of their bewilderment. Friar is interested in activating their humanity, their better natures. Shall be lamented, pitied, and excused of every hearer. For it so falls out that what we have, we prize not to the worth whilst we enjoy it, but being lacked and lost, why then we rack the value. Then we find the virtue that possession would not show us, whilst it was ours. And so it will fare with Claudio when he, yeah.
Speaking of the friar is kind of like the true moral center.
Yeah.
He wasn't involved in these other political or military groups. But his decision to go into deception like everybody else had been doing all along. But wait a minute, that's the way everyone seems to want to solve problems is to trick somebody.
Right, that's a brilliant comment. And I think it really, it brings us to the heart of the way Shakespeare thinks about the theater. The truth is not good enough, as I was saying earlier, to fix this problem, these multiple problems. Everyone either needs to be deceived again, or they need to consent to believe in what they know to be a lie, right? Shakespeare is, if I can think of another version of this, those of you who know Midsummer Night's Dream, which culminates in a society, many different social orders watching a play together, a badly performed play, right? One of those people, Hippolyta, doesn't want to see that play because she thinks it will be a public humiliation for the actors. I love not to see wretchedness or charged or duty in its service perishing, she says. And Theseus says, no, that's not how it works. I know they're lousy actors, but we will ennoble them and ourselves by pretending that they are better than they are, right? That very unequal society at the end of Midsummer Night's Dream somehow holds together around the performance of this terribly performed play because the audience agrees not to watch with the intention of humiliating the actors, but of honoring what they attempted to do, right? So Shakespeare does seem to believe that a lie can really go a long way to solving a problem if everyone freely agrees to believe in it. Not tricked into believing it, but agrees to believe in it. That you have to have, or those of you who know Henry V, right? So Henry V, the end of the second tetralogy, we've seen Hal do terrible and devious things in the first two plays, the two other plays that he's in. Then he becomes king, and the play keeps urging us to believe in him, get him to France, let him conquer France. That's where our future is together. And a lot of Shakespeare scholars now detest that play because they think of it as really imperialistic, nationalistic, xenophobic, certainly xenophobic about the French play. But in fact, I think that Shakespeare's thinking in that play too, as here, that the theater has an important role in creating the mythology that a people can agree to share as their common past, right? That's a history play. So you're right. You're exactly right to say that the friar is a big fat liar, right? He's not suggesting that we all have a restorative justice session, right? And just put it out on the table how we all feel. He is going to in fact, the whole end of the play is a deception organized by the friar, right? Including the funeral scene. He's willing to go so far as to basically pervert a sacrament in order to achieve this good. But the goal is to find something that people can believe in together, even though they will eventually learn that it was a lie. Not lose faith in it after they learn that it was a lie. So the question really is, how does his practice? He doesn't use the word practice, but he does use the word fashion. Where's that?
Fashion event.
Yeah, we'll fashion the event. And what I wanted to show you here is this lovely repetition of the word life. Okay, so we'll fair Claudia. When he shall hear she died upon his words, the idea of her life shall sweetly creep into his study of imagination, and every lovely organ of her life shall come apparelled in more precious habit, more moving, delicate, and full of life into the eye and prospect of his soul, than when she lived indeed. One more. Then shall he mourn if ever love had interest in his liver, meaning his organ. But there it is again, right? So, and wish that he had not so accused her, no, though he thought his accusation true. Let this be so, and doubt not but success will fashion the event in better shape than I can lay it down in likelihood. There's another evidence of the friar's humility as an impresario. He's aware that the thing that he's putting in motion will be more than his own cleverness, right? That it will sort of take on a life of its own as it becomes a social thing, right? That links all of these people together. And by taking on a life of its own, it will restore Hero's life, meaning her honor. She's not actually dead, but her honor will be restored. But it is a lie. Okay, so
This lot, that I let her live.
Right.
But we are supposed to be repulsed by the lie that she was attacked.
right. Okay, so that's great. Perfect. That's a perfect insight. I mean, on the one hand, you've got the friar lying. She gets an A, right? Lying to make new life possible. On the other hand, John lying to kill a marriage. And in between is Don Pedro, right? He's sort of, he's a series of mixed messages about creative intelligence in the play and what it means to deceive other people into believing things and feeling things that they otherwise would not believe or feel, right? So I have to believe that across that spectrum that runs from Friar to Don John, we're being invited to make some appraisal of the art form, right? And it's specifically Shakespeare's use of the art form. So where are we at the end of the play when it turns out that the erroneous belief that Hero is dead and that they have killed her leads Don Pedro, the highest ranking character in the play, and Claudio, the second highest ranking character in the play's account, to abase themselves before an empty coffin, right? And kneel to Leonardo. Right? That doesn't seem like such a big deal to us because we think they should go a great deal further than kneeling to Leonardo. But the fact that the reigning prince kneels to a mere governor of a city is a huge deal, right? It sort of upends the social order. And when it turns out that they were tricked into doing that, they don't feel shame and rage. They feel relief, right? So how has the friar pulled off that trick? Why is what he does to them not shaming to them? And I don't have a clear answer to this question.
Release them of the shame of what they've done with hero in a way that they probably have, I don't know, relief more than the guilt.
Okay, for you at home, the first thought that has arisen here is that the Friars Theater is a kind of therapy, right? That it relieves a burden of shame. It reveals that they've behaved foolishly, but maybe it doesn't make a fool of them in doing so, right? That it is generously intended toward even them, right? Mark, you wanted to say something?
He represents good, like
Yeah.
making things that's his center, that to have honesty and good and work it out. So if he uses a lie to get to that, his goal is not to destroy or embarrass or shame other people. It's to get good happen. And that would require all those other people to change their view.
Okay.
Not shame.
I see we're out of time, but let me just keep you 2 minutes more. Is the argument then that for Shakespeare, for Shakespearean comedy, the end justifies the means? Or do we leave the play with a lingering nervousness, let's just say nervousness, about comedy overall and what it means to be the butt of a joke, especially when the butt, more often than not, the butt of the joke in this play is someone watching other people perform and thinking that they're not under examination themselves, right? Do you, yeah.
So, when have I been such an idiot?
Right, that's the best outcome, right? When did I almost kill somebody, right? That is the best outcome.
Yeah, I see it as maybe Shakespeare is saying, life. We go through life as performers. Life is a performance. Sometimes we put a different role, different hat. We have to act things out.
Yeah.
So something like that.
It seems like it also speaks to the power of art, as that it could have been reported in words that, oh, she's fine, she survived, she's not dead. Wouldn't have the same evocative.
It has to be seen. Yeah. And the fact that Don Pedro and Claudio committed some kind of horrible sacrilege in the first wedding sort of means that Claudio anyway, has to go through another wedding where he's not in a position to do that. He has to be the one who's vulnerable to being rejected. And it's sort of like even Stephen, but you're exactly right to say that the theater brings all of that out into the space of the social order, right? Yeah, I don't know. One thing that clearly differentiates the Friars play from Don Pedro's plays is that it's all out in the open. And virtually every member of the society is playing along with the friar. I mean, Leonardo, Antonio, their servants, the sexton, they're all part of the performance that's being put on. Whereas with Don Pedro's things, they happen at night in darkness. It's a small group of men pulling a fast one on some other person. And it really does feel more tactical. You're telling me we have to stop. Yeah.
Just thinking of my own car.
Your car. It is noteworthy that Don Pedro is not clearly in charge at the end. That who seems to be in charge psycho-emotionally is Benedict, who is a married man, married to an equal, and who has exhibited the sort of the most positive way of being a man toward women in the play. So I guess we have to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for this. It really helped me prepare for my class.
So, John, let me tell everyone that next class is going to be with Abigail.
Yeah. Oh, the next class will be with my beloved spouse, Abigail Keel. She is great on the tragedies, and I think you will really enjoy that class.
Thank you.